everyone. We are back with Leaves Cyber Story Time. Today we are reading Chapter 10 and Chapter 11 of A Cricket in Times Square. So, without further ado, here we go. Chapter 10, The Dinner Party. Late one night, Chester Cricket was very busy inside the newsstand. As soon as the Bleenies went home, he hopped out of the matchbox and began to clean up. First, he pushed in the box so all the sides were even, and then slid it over beside the alarm clock. Next, he pulled a piece of Kleenex out of the Kleenex box and dragged it back and forth across the shelf. When the shelf was dusted, he picked up the tissue paper with his two front legs and polished the cricket cage so that its bars shone. He wiped off the glass in the front of the alarm clock and the radio, too, until he could see his own reflection. The light of the clock was luminous, and it shed a very soft green light. Chester wanted everything to be perfect that particular evening. There was going to be a party. It was exactly 2 months since Chester had arrived in New York, and the three animals wanted to celebrate the anniversary. Nothing too formal, you understand. Just a little dinner for everyone. Tucker Mouse had volunteered to let them use the drain pipe, but Chester didn't want to eat amidst all the waste paper and rubbish his friend had collected. So, after many conferences, they resolved on the newsstand. It was sheltered and quite big enough, and the radio would provide nice background music. Tucker jumped up beside Chester. "How's the food coming, Tucker?" asked the cricket. Tucker had been put in charge of refreshments. laughed Tucker Mouse, rubbing his front feet together. "Wait till I tell you." He lifted up one foot. "I have 2 chunks of liverwurst, 1 slice of ham, 3 pieces of bacon from a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, some lettuce and some tomato from said sandwich, whole wheat, rye, and white crusts, a big glob of coleslaw, 2 squares from a Hershey chocolate bar, the end of an O. Henry candy bar with nuts. And now comes the climax." Tucker paused dramatically. "Iced soft drinks." "Well, how'd you get the ice?" asked Chester. "Well, I'll tell you. All day long I've been hiding by the lunch counter. When the soda jerks made a Coke, I grabbed the ice they spilled, which I then took to the drain pipe. There," he went on with especial pride, "it is happening that I have a heat-proof, insulated bag saved up for just such an occasion. I put in the ice, shut up the opening. We have ice. Nice, huh?" He sat back on his haunches and grinned at Chester. "Very nice," said Chester. Where have you got the drinks?" "In paper cups," said Tucker, "and no mixing the drinks either. For each kind of soft drink, another cup." "That's wonderful," said the cricket with admiration. "It's nothing really," said Tucker, waving a foot. "I mean, it's something, but nothing too much." He looked around the shelf and looked at the clock and the cage and everything else. "You ought to be congratulated on the cleanliness. Of course it isn't as important as food getting, but to be clean is nice too." While they were talking, Harry Cat came in through the opening at the side of the newsstand. Chester hopped down like a good host to greet his new guest. "How was the concert?" he asked. Harry had been down to Washington Square to hear an open-air concert of chamber music. How you could play chamber music outdoors, Chester didn't understand. But it was New York, and anything could happen. "Very good," answered Harry, "but I don't think the violinist played nearly as well as you do." It made Chester happy to hear that, but he had to turn away so that Harry wouldn't see him blush. "Harry, help me with the food," said Tucker. He jumped down to the floor and scurried over to the drain pipe. The mouse and the cat put all the different courses over to one side with the soft drinks, so everyone could just go up and help himself. It was buffet style. Tucker and Chester sat on the shelf, and Harry, who was taller, sat on the stool, but his head was on a level with theirs. Tucker Mouse took great pride in cooling the soft drinks. There were 4 cups, one with Coca-Cola, one with Pepsi, one root beer, and the last orange soda. Tucker put a big piece of ice into each one and then made a show of stirring them up with a straw he had found that afternoon. "Ah," he sighed, "where but in New York could a mouse have ice in his Coca-Cola?" "We should have music," said Harry. He reached over and flicked on the radio. First, they got a news report, but that wouldn't do for a party. Harry twisted the dial and went through a quiz show, an amateur hour, and a play about the Deep South before he got what he wanted. Music is very nice for a party because it gives you time to eat your fill without having to make conversation. Harry Cat was working on his second piece of O. Henry candy bar when he suddenly stopped munching and listened to the tune the radio was playing. His head began to sway from side to side. "That's my favorite song," he said, beginning to hum along with it. "Sing it, Harry," said Chester Cricket. "You don't know what you're letting yourself in for," blurted out Tucker Mouse through a mouthful of bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. But Harry was, so he cleared his throat and began. "When I'm calling you." Harry had a yowl that he thought went very well with the lyrics of the song. "You see what I told you?" groaned Tucker. Harry went right on, however. "Will you answer true? Maybe we should turn back to amateur hour," said Tucker Mouse, helping himself to a Hershey bar. "I think Harry sings beautifully," said Chester. "You sing now, Chester," said Tucker. Secretly, the Cricket was very anxious to perform for them, but he had to have some encouragement first. He limbered his wings and said, "It's not really singing, you know." "Singing, playing, who cares? So long as it doesn't sound like Harry," said Tucker. He slurped up the last of the orange soda, and they all fell silent. It was well along into August now, and just the time of year that crickets all over the world like most. Harry hadn't done nearly as much chirping as usual this summer because he was living in New York, but tonight he played to his heart's content. He thought of his meadow and the stump, the brook and the old willow tree. The song swelled up from his wings and filled the newsstand. When it was over, Tucker and Harry applauded and congratulated Chester. "Now, play us something we know," suggested Harry Cat. "I don't know if I can," said Chester. "All my songs are my own compositions." "Listen to the radio and play what it does," said Harry. He turned up the music. Chester cocked his head onto one side. The radio was playing the Blue Danube Waltz. When he heard enough to memorize the melody, Chester joined in. And he played it perfectly. The Cricket was such a natural musician that he not only chirped the tune. In a few minutes he was making up variations and spinning them out without ever losing the rhythm of the waltz. He found that by tilting his wings he could make the notes go higher or lower just as he wanted. Chester got an ovation from his friends. Harry Cat, who had crept into the Metropolitan Opera House a few times and knew how people acted there, shouted, "Bravo, Chester, bravo!" Of course, after such a sample of his talents for imitating songs, his friends insisted that he keep on, and Chester was happy to oblige. There's nothing like a good audience to encourage a performer. The next selection from the radio was a group of Italian folk songs. Chester picked out the different melodies and chirped along with the orchestra. After the folk songs came a group of operatic arias. It was easier for Chester to play the ones written for the tenors than the ones for sopranos, contralto, and bass, but he did them all beautifully. Each time he stopped after singing a new piece, the animals shouted, "More, more, more!" So Chester went right on. Now came a South American rumba. The rhythm was very tricky, and it took the cricket a few minutes to catch on to it, but once he had it, he never lost the beat. Chirping away, he sounded like a pair of lively castanets. "Imagine!" exclaimed Tucker Mouse. "He plays pop as well as classical." Tucker was feeling very lively himself because of all the soda water he had swallowed. The South American tempo began to excite him. He jumped up and started to dance about the shelf. Harry Cat burst out laughing, but that didn't bother Tucker. He was a carefree soul. "Chester can play, I can dance," he panted. "We should go into vaudeville." "If you danced as well as he plays, you could," said Harry. "So I'm just learning," said Tucker, and threw himself into a wild twirl next to Papa Bellini's pipe. He couldn't see where he was going, and he toppled over into the box of kitchen matches. The box flipped over. A shower of matches fell around the shelf and onto the cement floor. There were several yellow bursts, and the sharp scratch that a match makes when it's lit. Most of them fell far enough away from the wooden walls so they could burn themselves out without danger. But one match, unluckily, struck right next to a pile of that morning's newspapers. The spurt of flames it sent up lit the frayed edge of the papers and quickly spread over the whole bundle. "Watch out!" shouted Chester. Harry Cat leapt up to the shelf just in time to keep his tail from being burned. The cricket was the first to realize what had happened, and what was likely to happen if they didn't put the fire out. "Get the Coca-Cola," he said. "Pour it all over." "I drank it all," shouted Tucker. "Oh, you would," said Chester. "Is there any ice?" Harry and Tucker dumped what was left in the insulated brown bag down the flames, but it wasn't enough. The fire sputtered, died down, and then flared up again, larger than ever. "Maybe we can smother it," said Harry. There was a pile of magazines on the very edge of the shelf, just above the fire. Harry strained and pushed and succeeded in toppling them over. They all peered over the edge to see if the fire was out. "Oh, great," said Tucker. "She's still burning, and you blocked the hole to get it out." They were trapped. Harry and Tucker jumped up and down and started pulling the magazines away furiously, but the fire crept closer, and they had to back away. "What a way to go," said Tucker. "I should have stayed on 10th Avenue. For a moment, Chester got panicky, but he forced his thoughts into order and took stock of the situation. And an idea struck him. In one leap, he jumped onto the alarm clock, landing right on the button that set off the alarm. The old clock began ringing so wildly, it shook itself around on the shelf in a mad dance. Chester hopped back to his friends. "Any alarm in a fire," he said. They waited, crouched against the wall. On the opposite side of the stand, the flames were lapping against the wood. Already the paint on it had begun to blister. Chester could hear voices outside the newsstand. Even at this hour, there are always a few people in the station. Someone said, "What's that?" "I smell smoke," said another. Chester recognized the voice. It was Paul, the conductor on the shuttle. There was a sound of footsteps running away, and then running back again, and hammering began. The newsstand shook all over. "Somebody get on the other side," said Paul. The cover was wrenched off. Clouds of smoke billowed up. The people standing around were astonished to see, through the fumes and the glare of the fire, a cat, a mouse, and a cricket running and jumping to safety. Chapter 11. The Jinx. From the drain pipe, the animals watched Paul put out the fire. He dragged what papers he could out of the newsstand and got a bucket of water to douse the rest. And he watered down the walls to make sure they wouldn't flare up later. When the danger was over, he called up Papa Bellini on the telephone. "What a mess," said Tucker Mouse, looking at the soggy, smoldering piles of papers and magazines. No one knew what to say. "What are you going to do, Chester?" said Harry Cat finally. "I'm going to go back there," said Chester. "If the Bellinis find me gone, they'll think I set the fire and ran." "What makes you think they won't think you set the fire and stayed?" said Tucker. "I have to take that chance," said Chester. Before the cat or mouse could say anything to stop him, he hopped over to the newsstand. Paul had told the engineer that he would miss a few trips on the shuttle and was waiting for the Bellinis. He didn't want anyone monkeying with the cash register while the cover was off. The conductor thought that the cups and bags from the animals' party had been left by Mario or Papa. While he was taking them over to a trash barrel, Chester jumped up on the shelf. Nothing there had been burned, but there was a smoky smell to everything. The cricket took a downhearted leap into the cage and settled himself for whatever might come. It didn't take the Bellinis long to arrive. They had taken a taxi. And when the Bellinis took a taxi, you could be sure it was an emergency. Chester could hear them hurrying down the steps from the street. Papa was trying to soothe Mama, who was wheezing heavily from asthma and excitement. When she saw the heaps of scorched magazines and newspapers, she began to moan and shake her head. Papa eased her down onto the stool, but it was still covered with water, and she stood up again with a wet spot on her skirt. "Ruined! We're ruined!" she sobbed. "Everything's burned!" Papa comforted her as best he could by saying that it was only a few stacks of the Ladies' Home Journal that had been lost. But Mama wouldn't believe that anything less than complete destruction had come to them all. Mario, who had brought up the rear of this sad parade, thought first for the safety of his cricket. He saw that Chester was in his cage and decided that it would be best to keep quiet until Mama's outburst of grief had subsided. Paul told them what had happened, how he had smelled the smoke and heard the alarm clock ringing. Then he came to the part about the animals who had escaped from the burning newsstand. "So," said Mama Bellini, all her despair changing into anger. "Animals in the newsstand again! Didn't I tell you?" She lifted her finger at Mario. "Didn't I say the cricketer would bring his pals? He probably set the fire. He's a firebug." Mario didn't have a chance to speak. He would open his mouth to defend Chester, but before he could say a thing, the words were drowned in Mama's flood of reproaches. She had found someone on whom she could blame her unhappiness, and there was no stopping her. When a pause came, Mario said meekly, "My cricket would never do anything like burn up the newsstand." "The fact remains," said Mama, "we had a fire." "But crickets are good," said Mario began. "Good luck," said Mama indignantly. "He eats money, he commits arson, he's a jinx, that's what. He's good luck going backwards, and he's got to go." She folded her arms across her chest. It was an attitude that Mario knew meant the absolute end of everything. I could keep him somewhere else, the boy offered. No, said Mama, shaking her head as firmly as a door being closed. He's a jinx. He goes. Papa put his finger to his lips as a signal that Mario shouldn't say anything more, and the two of them began to clean up. They carted away all the hopelessly burned magazines and tried to salvage some of the ones that had only been scorched. Mario mopped the floor of the newsstand while Mama spread papers out to dry. By the time they were finished, it was almost the hour for the first wave of commuters. Chester was lying on the floor of the cricket cage. He felt guilty because even if he hadn't said it, in a way the fire was his fault. If he hadn't invited everyone into the newsstand, it wouldn't have happened. And it was his playing of the rumba that had made Tucker want to dance and so tip over the matches. And he did eat the $2 bill. He began to believe that he really was a jinx. During the early morning rush hour, Mario was especially eager in his shouts of, "Paper, mister!" and "Time or life, mister!" Papa was more active than usual, too. But Mama sat glumly on the stool with a gray, determined look on her face. Despite the fact that the selling that morning went very well, she wouldn't change her mind. After the rush was over, Papa went out to buy a new lock. Chester heard a soft scratching from beside the Kleenex box. A familiar face peeked out. "What's going on?" whispered Tucker Mouse. "Are you crazy?" said Chester under his breath. "All they need is to catch you here." "I had to find out how you were doing," said Tucker. "They're going to throw me out," said Chester. "Oh," Tucker moaned, "and it was me that did it. Supposing I give you the rest of my life savings. Maybe we could buy them off." Chester leaned back, his black little head up against the bars of the cricket cage. "Not this time," he said. "Mama's got her mind made up. I don't blame her either. I wish I'd never come to New York." "Oh, Chester," wailed Tucker Mouse. "Don't say that. You make me feel like a rat, and I'm only a mouse." Without knowing what he was doing, the cricket began to chirp to ease his feelings. He found that it helped somehow if you sang your sadness. He wasn't paying much attention, and just by accident he played the first few notes of an Italian folk song he had heard the night before. It was so melancholy and yet so sweet that it fitted his mood perfectly. Mama Bellini was untying a bundle of Herald Tribunes when she heard the chirping. At first she didn't know what it was. "Che cos'è questa?" she said in Italian, which means, "What's that?" Chester stopped playing. "Chi canta? Who's singing?" Mario looked at his mother. Usually when she spoke Italian, it meant that she was in a good mood, but that couldn't be true today. Now Tucker Mouse was a very good judge of character, both animal and human. He thought he heard a kind of softness in Mama Bellini's voice. "Play some more," he whispered to Chester. "She hates me," said Chester. "It'll only make her more angry." "Do like I tell you," commanded the mouse urgently. So Chester started to chirp again. He was in such disgrace already. What difference could it make? The piece he was playing was called "Come Back to Sorrento," and by the greatest good luck, it happened to be Mama Bellini's favorite song. Back in Naples, Italy, when Papa was courting her before they came to America, he used to come beneath her window on a moonlit night and sing this ballad to the plunking of an old guitar. As the cricket chirped, the whole scene came back to Mama. The warm, still night, the moon shining down on the velvety Bay of Naples, and Papa singing to her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought of the bygone times, and very softly she started to murmur the words of the song. Chester Cricket had never played with so much skill before. When he heard Mama singing, he slowed his tempo so that she could keep up without straining. When she got loud, he was too. Then softer when she got choked up with emotion and her voice dwindled. But always his chirping carried her along, keeping her on the right beat and the right tune. He was the perfect accompanist. Mario was dumbfounded. He stared astonished at the cricket cage and then at his mother. It was just as marvelous for his mother to be singing as it was for a cricket to chirp familiar songs. Sometimes, when she was very happy, Mama Bellini whistled, and once or twice Mario had heard her hum. But now, here she was, singing and crying and warbling like an Italian nightingale. Chester finished Come Back to Sorrento. Keep it up, keep it up, squeaked Tucker Mouse. She's a sucker for sad songs. Before Mama's mood had a chance to wear off, Chester began chirping selections from opera that he had played during the party. Mama didn't know the words to the operas, but she hummed some of the tunes along with him. Mario sat still as a stone. Papa Bellini came back from the locksmith's. Coming down the stairs, he was surprised not to hear his wife and Mario calling out the newspapers. But when he got nearer to the newsstand, he was even more surprised to hear the strains of the Grand March from Aida coming from the cricket cage. "He chirps opera?" exclaimed Papa. His eyes looked as big and startled as two hard-boiled eggs. "Shh!" said Mama with a wave of her hand. Chester's memory for music was perfect. He only had to hear a piece once to remember it forever. When he finished all the operatic numbers, he stopped. "Should I go on with the pop tunes?" he whispered to Tucker Mouse, who was still hidden behind the Kleenex box. "Wait a while, see what happens," said Tucker. Mama Bellini had a dreamy look in her eyes. She put her arm around her son and said, "Mario, no cricketer who sings Torna Sorrento so beautifully could possibly start a fire. He can stay a while longer." Mario threw his arms around his mother's neck. "You hear? You hear?" squeaked Tucker. "You can stay. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And this is only the beginning. I get to be your manager, okay?" "Okay," said Chester. And so began the most remarkable week in Chester Cricket's, or any cricket's, life. Tomorrow we will continue with chapter 12. Thank you all, and we'll see you at 2 o'clock tomorrow. See ya. Bye.